No matter what you've heard.
In today's news, a Florida federal judge has ruled the U.S. law banning firearms in post offices unconstitutional.
Do not challenge the post office. It might still be illegal to carry your gun. Tom, we're talking about the post office. We've heard it online that, hey, post office rules are unconstitutional. They can't keep us from carrying a gun at the post office. I've been telling people for years, don't take your gun to the post office. It's a federal felony to even carry it into the post office parking lot. But now we hear that some people are claiming these post office regulations, rules, laws, whatever we want to call them, are unconstitutional. Should I be the test case and carry my gun into the post office?
Well, that's up to you.
I got a good lawyer.
You got a good lawyer,
Yep.
but that lawyer is telling you don't.
Okay.
Just so we're clear. Okay. Okay, so we've got a case called U.S. versus Ayala. This took place down in Florida. It involves a U.S. postal worker who basically was caught concealed carrying during the job within the federal facility. When he was walking to clock in, he had a firearm in his fanny pack. The issue here is we've got both federal law as well as federal rules, U.S. Postal Code. But we're specifically focused right now on the federal law that prohibits possession of firearms inside a federal facility. All right. So Mr. Ayala gets charged in federal criminal court for being in possession of a firearm in this federal facility. And his lawyers raise a constitutional challenge on the Second Amendment grounds saying, look, ever since we've had the Bruen decision, that's B-R-U-E-N, ever since we've had the Bruen decision back in June of 2022, we've got a new test that's in town now to determine whether or not laws and regulations that impact a protected Second Amendment activity, which definitely includes being an adult citizen going armed in public with an ordinary weapon, which basically includes, by definition, virtually all semi-automatic handguns, revolvers, and so forth, as we have here. If something you're doing is protected, which what Mr. Ayala was doing was protected, then it needs to be justified by the history and tradition of firearm laws and regulations within the United States' history. And then there's a further caveat that history and tradition, the two sides are arguing, pro-gun, anti-gun, about when they can basically pull laws from as being part of history and tradition. If you're pro-gun, you want to see early republic, basically the colonies up to about 1830. The anti-gunners are pushing for Reconstruction post-Civil War, so they're pushing for 1860s, 1870s, 80s, 90s.
When all the gun control laws started.
When the Jim Crow gun control laws really started up through the Sullivan Act in 1911, which is thanks to that's where we got the Heller decision, actually, some almost 100 years later. But right, I mean, conveniently, I've heard anti-gun people argue that the 1990s is part of United States tradition and history and so forth in order to justify gun control. So the basic gist of this is that they say, look, we've had post offices around, we've had criminals around, and we've had, in particular, we've also had U.S. postal workers who have been armed all the way through the 1800s into the early 20th century to protect railway cars, you name it. Where is the history and tradition that says you cannot possess firearms in a postal office or in a federal facility?
And I understand that this spun out of a knee-jerk reaction because of shootings at postal facilities. And honestly, when we looked at all of these, the chances of a shooting happening at a postal facility are a lot lower than in other areas. You know, despite what people use the term going postal and stuff like that. Just because there was a couple of shootings at postal facilities, the Postal Service decided that they were going to, in effect, ban guns throughout or ban the possession of firearms throughout their facilities, on their property, even in their parking lots. That really hasn't changed yet. I just want people to know this because the claim is that this is unconstitutional, but this hasn't been adjudicated yet. This hasn't come to the full end of what's happening.
Yeah, so invariably what will happen is that we have the current trial court in Florida who has dismissed this case now as a result of finding this ruling and saying, look, this law as applied to Mr. Ayala in this case is unconstitutional. Okay, it fails Second Amendment muster, so to speak. This is not a precedent-setting court, okay? So we will see whether or not the government wants to appeal this and bring it up to one of the 13 circuit courts in the United States. So we've got federal trial courts. These are not precedent-setting courts. There are times when if somebody's challenging a administrative code, or if you're challenging the constitutionality, say you sued the government or something like that, there are times and ways where those federal trial courts can impact the law across the entire United States. Just so we're clear, this is not one of those times.
So
Okay?
as far as everybody is concerned, the rules still stand. Don't take your gun to the post office just because of this trial going on down in Florida, or actually it's been dismissed in Florida. We're probably going to see this go up to the circuit court, maybe even all the way to the Supreme Court.
It's going to be up to what the U.S. prosecutor wants to do. If they're going to appeal it up and risk making bad case law, there's the expression that bad facts make bad law. This is seemingly right now very good facts for the pro-Second Amendment side. There's nothing in the record to suggest that Mr. Ayala was, a 10-time felon doing 10-time felon things, and he's a really bad guy, and this is going to be really quite cringy, for lack of a better way of putting it, if this makes it up to the Court of Appeals and the circuit court says, look, this guy's pretty bad. We don't want this guy to be carrying guns here, so we're going to uphold this rule. That doesn't seem to be what we have here at all. It seems like, and I hope, we've got a good guy who just wanted to be able to protect himself while he was working, and he happened to work for the U.S. Postal Service.
Mm-hmm. And that's typically the case everywhere. Good guys just want to be able to protect themselves while they're working. And now this is going to work its way through the courts. But again, I don't want anyone to make the mistake of saying this has changed everything for the Postal Service. You can still get yourself in lots of trouble, folks, if you carry your gun into the post office, and you don't want to be the test case. You don't want to have to go find that good defense attorney and see how this plays out.
Yeah, you definitely don't want that. And look, when the Brune decision was decided back in 2022, we have seen in just the 6 months following that in 2022, we saw more gun laws fall during those 6 months for not being constitutional than the entire preceding history of the United States. That says a lot about the power of that one court decision. And I went on record maybe the better part of a year ago in saying that, look, I think that this post office challenge, based on where the government is going to be allowed to ban guns, because I'm not editorializing this, I'm just reporting this, but the U.S. Supreme Court has sanctioned the idea of sensitive locations. In other words, locations where the government may ban firearms. And based on looking at that test, I think it's going to be a stretch to suggest that the post office is going to fall inside of that. I think that it could go either way, but I think that it's going to be a bit of a stretch.
Well, we'll keep watching this and let folks know what's going on. But for now, don't carry your guns to the post office, folks. What I'm going to suggest to people, Tom, is that they have a means by which they can lock up their firearm in their vehicle if they're going to go to the post office. Don't park in the post office parking lot. Lock up your firearm, go into the post office, do your business inside the post office, come back out, put your gun in the holster, and carry on your day. That's probably going to be the best way that they can be legally safe. They're not going to be physically safe from attack while they're walking to and from the post office, but those are the rules that we have now, so they got to pay attention to those.
We have now, but hopefully not for long.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before you go, if you think you're using the right caliber for self-defense, think again. And you might not even know it, but your ammo could be putting you at severe disadvantage when you pull the trigger. Click the link in the description below to watch this short, unbiased video comparing the top 4 self-defense calibers and see if you end up changing handguns.